Secretary Kenny, welcome to New Mexico in Focus. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So the Air Force recently announced a pilot project that they're getting ready to contract. It's a water treatment plant. As you understand it, how does this pilot project tie in with cleanup plans at Cannon Air Force Base?
Laura, that's a great question. The pilot project that I understand Cannon is undertaking is a system that will prevent PFAS contaminated wastewater, groundwater from migrating off base. In terms of a larger delineation and cleanup of the area, the Air Force hasn't been in contact with us to talk about that. However, the New Mexico Environment Department is leading an effort there.
Okay. So the initial testing that was done that revealed that there was contamination from PFAS at Cannon Air Force Base and Holloman Air Force Base, seems like those tests were done back in 2017, 4 years ago. What do we know right now about where these plumes have migrated or moved?
So again, it's a great question. The time frame by which we're trying to motivate the Department of Defense to do something about this, there's that effort. And then there's the effort that the state of New Mexico is independently taking. So we've been unsuccessful, maybe up through the recent announcement that they're going to address some of the migration at Cannon. But the state of New Mexico has gone back to the legislature, sought appropriations, and has begun a study in the area to both understand the delineate, to know where the plume is, and then to figure out ways to clean it up. So we're in that process.
How much has the state already spent or has been allocated that New Mexico taxpayers are having to pay for this contamination from the U.S. Air Force?
So numbers that quickly come to mind, we have a $1 million appropriation to focus on this area to delineate both Cannon and Holloman, the PFAS in those locations, as well as about $4 million with respect to those particular counties to understand how it's impacting drinking water, public drinking water systems, and then to put money towards those systems if they are impacted. So all in all, I can easily count up about $5 million have gone into those particular areas, as well as statewide. There's statewide efforts going on. We're also spending an inordinate amount of time across all the departments, staff time as well, focusing on analyzing results, communicating results, understanding and communicating risk to communities. So it's a big endeavor.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that risk. Why is the state concerned about these particular toxic substances? What do they do? What harm do they potentially cause?
So PFAS is one of those chemicals that once it gets into the ground or groundwater, it's really hard to remove. When it gets there, it continues to migrate in the groundwater. And then when it comes into contact with drinking water sources, typically drinking water sources are not treating for that type of chemical. And therefore we ingest it. We shower in that water. That's the water that comes to our houses. So when that happens, the science around PFAS is that it is a suspected carcinogen, causes cancer. It gets involved in reproductive issues. It causes not only diabetes, but some of the chemicals cause diabetes. They cause weight gain, high cholesterol, things like that. So it's a chemical that once in the environment and moving into the way we live our lives can cause some public health issues that we're very concerned about.
So I think it's fair to say that the Air Force and the state of New Mexico are not necessarily cooperating on this cleanup. Can you characterize the relationship that the Air Force and the state have had since regulators were notified in 2018 about this contamination?
I think when you look back at the path we took in the state of New Mexico to hold the Defense Department accountable, we didn't set out to litigate. That we wanted action quickly. When that wasn't available or that wasn't on the table, that's when we litigated, because in reality, litigation based on the timeframes that were proposed to us seemed like the shortest path forward. The relationship we have with our bases is actually quite positive. They, the servicemen and women contribute a lot to the state of New Mexico, and we value that, obviously. It's the notion that we will somehow wait to protect New Mexicans, wait to protect our economy. That's the part that we have to be intolerant about, and that's why we're in a lawsuit.
So, and as I understand it, the Defense Department filed a lawsuit against New Mexico when regulators tried to compel the military to clean up. Recently, the Biden administration filed saying that this lawsuit was that the state had acted arbitrarily and capriciously. What's the status of that lawsuit right now?
Yeah, so it might be helpful, as you point out, to just acknowledge that the first lawsuit was suing the state of New Mexico to prevent PFAS cleanup at Cannon Air Force Base. That lawsuit is continuing to move through the court system, and we stand firmly by we made the right decision that PFAS is a hazardous substance, a hazardous waste. For the reasons we've talked about, it can affect people's public health. Therefore, we are going to continue to focus on making sure that gets cleaned up. I would hope that under the current federal administration, under all the movement by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to acknowledge the risk of PFAS, that message gets to the Department of Defense as well as the Department of Justice, and they understand that New Mexicans should not have to fight to clean up contaminated groundwater, and they are on the wrong side of this issue.
So it seems to me that there's sort of this issue is like blowing up on all different fronts, and federal taxpayers, will be the ones to pay for any eventual cleanup. New Mexicans are also paying for these testing programs to see where the plume has migrated. We're also having to pay for a lawsuit defend ourselves against the Air Force. Do you have any sense of how much the legal side of this is costing New Mexico at this point?
It's, again, a great question, and between the investment of between the investment of the Attorney General, the state of New Mexico, the executive agencies in the state of New Mexico, the potential harm to our economy through the ag industry as well, another sort of line item in the long lists you analyzed. I don't have a number for you. I think that would be a great effort for New Mexico to put that together. The notion that we're at loggerheads over what we all acknowledge is a toxic pollutant we know why it was released, when it was released, how it was released. It is merely a matter of getting to cleanup that we're fighting about. That doesn't make sense to any of us, and I'm sure it doesn't make sense to the feds at this point either. But we need to thaw that, and they need to come forward and do what's right by our state.
So you recently testified before a committee in Congress asking for the federal government to help states like New Mexico. What do we need? What do states need from, say, the Environmental Protection Agency?
Again, I think that's a great question, and one of the reasons I was very eager to testify before that full committee of the Senate Environment and Public Works was to lay out our needs. And our needs are one, to have PFAS treated as the toxic chemical it is. Molecules of PFAS don't understand whether they're labeled as a hazardous substance or not. That's us putting that on them. We need a comprehensive way to tackle PFAS, and that's what I was suggesting to Congress, that we list PFAS as a hazardous waste under federal law as intended by Congress, and we do that immediately so that we have a way to manage PFAS from the time it comes into the state to the time it's disposed of, and everything in between. It's managed in that way. So we're not just finding it haphazardly and then having to deal with the public health impacts that way. We also need a drinking water standard. As you know, and many viewers probably know, there is no national drinking water standard for PFAS. States are taking a leadership role in setting those, and when we move forward to address, we as states move forward to address PFAS as a hazardous waste or as a pollutant in drinking water, the federal government gets in our way and sues us. That's our experience here in New Mexico. So in one way, we're being innovative and entrepreneurial and solving the problems in communities, and then we're roadblocked by the feds. So we need federal leadership on these issues.
So the New Mexico congressional delegation, the Democratic members of the congressional delegation have been vocal about supporting New Mexico and trying to get the Air Force to act on cleanup, and yet there hasn't been much action out of that. Is there anything that Congress can do to be helping states like New Mexico?
Yes, I think there's a number of things that Congress could be doing. Some of the things I mentioned are listing PFAS as a hazardous waste and setting a national drinking water standard. But those are executive agencies like EPA that would do it, but Congress can put them on a timeline to get it done. In addition, there are the National Defense Authorization Act has money in it for states who are dealing with the implications of PFAS. That money could be deployed directly into the state of New Mexico to help offset the costs that you so eloquently pointed out that New Mexicans are now paying for with respect to litigation, with respect to testing, sampling, delineation, and ultimately remediation.
So we've known for decades that PFAS are a problem to workers, to public health. Some governments, like the European Union, have moved forward with trying to regulate it. What do you think the holdup has been in the United States in terms of getting these toxic substances regulated?
As we think about these toxic substances, we apply typically really good science in making making decisions about how to regulate them. Our hair is on fire with PFAS. We have to move quicker than we've ever moved before. And I was thinking about this analogy, Laura, when COVID came into existence and changed our lives. That was a viral agent, a biological agent that we all got behind and worked diligently to protect public health. I think we need to move with that speed on PFAS and get out of the bureaucratic thinking, and the reasons to say no have to become reasons to say yes. And I think that is exactly what the federal government needs to do in here. But states need to do it as well, and they can't be hampered in the process of doing that. So science-based decision making, but at the speed in which this problem necessitates.
So the EPA has said that PFAS is a priority for the Biden administration. When I've requested an interview with their experts to talk about PFAS, plans to regulate, studies for a greater number of the substances, they've told me that it's premature to grant an interview and talk about any of this. Do you think that PFAS is a priority for the EPA under the Biden administration?
I do. I think it is a priority. I think that in any transition, especially the last transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, there's a significant amount of work to be done, not only to stop the train that was moving down the tracks, but then reverse course. And I think sorting out some of the bureaucracy and understanding how to move forward comprehensively is what's going on now. I am optimistic based on my conversations with the feds that they're going to lean in heavy. But again, leaning in heavy versus leaning in now are two different things. And every day we think about the people who are impacted by PFAS in New Mexico, from property values to, you know, their health. We can't wait. So we will continue to put as much pressure on the Biden administration as possible, and we will continue to help them act even if they're not sure they're ready.
So PFAS is a national problem. Like when I look at the news, I see all kinds of different states and communities are dealing with this problem of military contamination of local water. And various states and communities have tried different strategies, basically. Do you see, where do you see states or communities being effective in trying to compel the military to actually do this cleanup?
Yeah, and I'm an avid reader of everything PFAS and an avid consumer of anything related to the topic. And what I see and what has been said in other states is when the state, along with the congressional delegation, along with its citizens and environmental groups, that combination, speaking together and speaking forcefully, is what sometimes can change the Department of Defense in making a site that's a lower priority a higher priority. I think we've been gregarious in our approach, and we've had good support from everyone I just mentioned. But it's not enough. We are trying everything possible to move our litigation, to move the Department of Defense, to move the feds, and it is something that if there's another idea out there that we could do, we will do it.
Yeah, for me, it seems very intimidating for states to be squaring up against, you know, potentially the most powerful institution maybe in the world. Like, how do states effectively take on the U.S. military on this?
You know, as somebody who's been a regulator, specifically has done enforcement for the feds before this role that I'm in now, you have to lay out a really good plan, and we have a really good plan that we're implementing. But states can't be afraid. We are not only the incubators of good ideas for the federal government, but we have to hold the federal government accountable. And we did that a lot in the last administration, and I'm hoping in this one we will be more lockstep, and I'm confident we will be. But in any relationship, you have to know your boundaries, and ours are not going to be at the expense of waiting for federal action. We're going to keep pushing forward. Way back in the early days when I was with EPA, I was one of the first people to sue the Bureau of the Mint for chromium emissions coming out of their coin facility in Philadelphia. And it was game changing to the point that the Secretary of Treasury, where the U.S. Mint is housed, contacted the administrator of EPA. And, you know, don't underestimate the power of being 24, gregarious, and wanting to change the environment and the landscape. That's what we need, and that's what we're doing, although I'm not 24 anymore.
Well, Secretary Kenney, thank you so much for joining me on New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.